Welcome to Voices of Care, real stories to inspire, uplift, and unite caregivers with hosts Maggie Linton and Carl Powell. Enjoy the conversation. Welcome to Voices of Care. I'm Maggie Linton along with Carl Powell. And today we
Aloha.
have a very interesting guest who's walked that path of a caregiver. It is Dan Cohen. He is an entrepreneur, an author, and a podcast host. And it is all based on something that happened in his life concerning his dad, and it really awakened him too. The book and the podcast are both called Awakenings in Real Life. Welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Maggie, Carl, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to join you on both coasts because well, Carl's even further than the West Coast, but
Yeah, definitely.
I'm happy to. Although I'd rather be in Hawaii, I'm happy to be here
Yeah,
too.
well, we've got a pretty nice day here right now. So it's supposed
Yeah,
to be worse tomorrow, but today I'll take every day as I get it. Dan,
we did too.
give us some background about you because your story is interesting, but it begins with you and then get into your dad.
Sure. Well, I actually grew up in Brooklyn, New York, as you can tell from the accent. I had someone the other day said I sounded British. And I thought that was odd. Everybody loves a British accent. I was in
Yeah.
England once and they loved my Brooklyn accent. That blew me away. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I went to school there. I spent the beginning of my career as an attorney. I actually practiced for about 4.5 years. I hated being an attorney. It's 99% pushing paper. I like the courtroom stuff, but wasn't enough of it. I went into business with a cousin of mine. We were entrepreneurs. We sold green cleaners and environmentally friendly paint and varnish removers. My father, and I was following in my father's footsteps. He was a businessman in his life, and he was a guy that sold chemicals and lights over the phone. He was a guy that probably revolutionized telemarketing by selling goods that typically were sold door to door. He figured out a way to sell it by the phone, over the phone. So my father was a very big presence in my life. He was my confidant. He was my problem solver. He was probably my best friend, anyone I could go to. I write a chapter in my book, Awakenings in Life, Real Life. The last chapter, actually, I call it The One, and he was the one for me. And that person can be slightly different than your hero. It's the person who has no ego when it comes to you. They want to see you succeed. They love you unconditionally. They don't have to be perfect. And I don't think there's any statute of limitation for the one, that in life. So he was that even in later in life. And I saw a thing with Tom Brady. Someone asked him who's his hero, and he said his father. And before we got on, Maggie, you talked about Mr. Buck, and I'm sure his son would say that about his father, Jack, as well. So he was a very big presence in my life. So when we had this event with him, it was earth-shattering. And what happened was, is at his when he turned 75, we made a surprise party for him. And from my mother down to the youngest grandchildren, we all got to express ourselves to him. And he probably was in all his glory with everybody expressing how they felt about him. But 5 months later, he had a stroke. And my brother is a physician, and he happened to be walking into his office for a checkup, and they knew immediately that he was having a stroke. When someone's having a stroke, they can't smile. Usually one side of their face is drooping. They knew it right away. He was bleeding into his brain. They got him into the hospital. Within 10 minutes, they had the bleeding stopped. Um, he recovered pretty good after that. For the first couple of years, he was able to drive. He used his cell phone. He was pretty good. But from that stroke, he developed dementia. So, people are familiar with that. You've had experience with people with Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yes.
It's touched many, many people, and a lot of people don't know that Alzheimer's and dementia is the symptoms for Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is
Mm,
probably what most of us is familiar with. It's plaque in the brain, but it leads to dementia, which is the deteriorating mental condition. But dementia can happen from certain diseases, from Alzheimer's, from blows to the brain, vascular dementia. There's a whole reasons why it happens. It typically runs in stages. There's 7 stages of dementia. I tell people when I'm talking to people that are going through it with a family member, just for me, I didn't get too crazed about which stage my father was in because it can bring you a lot of angst. Is he in stage 4? Is he in stage 5? Is he in stage 6? You know what your loved one is going through, so I didn't feel the obsession to know exactly the medical stage. I knew where he was and what was going on. So he had dementia over 11 years before he passed away. Actually,
mm,
yesterday was 10 years that he passed away. And he deteriorated over those 10 years, this big, tremendous presence in my life. And it's almost like you're mourning someone who's living. It's a very difficult thing to do. But what I tried to do, my mother was the primary caregiver. She lived with him until we got to the point we had to bring help into the home. And I came weekly or every other week, is I tried to take them to the movies and go to lunch with them. Um, and I felt it very important to include him in life. And if you want, before I get into his awakening, I could share with you just as a son some of the things I learned in caregiving for my father.
Please do, because
Because
that's what's so
we do,
important.
because that's the reason why I created Voices of Care. Is my mother had dementia, and again, she had a stroke, and that's how we discovered she was having decline, but we couldn't understand what it was. When she
Right,
had the stroke, and they went in and they looked at her brain. They said, she's had many strokes
right,
throughout, and immediately they said this is dementia, and that was the first time that I ever had to deal with it that close to me, and
right.
it changed my life, and that's the reason why I created Voices of Care, and that's the reason why I reach out to caregivers, because I know what we go through, and I know how hard it is, and I know that we all have a story, and our story is important.
Yeah, and obviously and listen, I'm not an expert. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a PhD. I can only give you my experiences and what I try to when people talk to me about it. So the 2 things, and I share it in my book too, and I'll tell you a couple of stories if you want. My 2 things are acceptance and inclusion. So the
Mm,
first thing is, dementia runs in stages, right? And a person with dementia, they might repeat things over and over, right? They might ask the same question over and over. And our tendency is to say is, you already asked me that, or I
mm,
already gave you the answer to that, and we get frustrated and we think of a person as if they're not necessarily in the throes of dementia. And you really got to accept your loved one for where they're at,
Sure.
and you got to give yourself acceptance too. So if you can accept them where they're at, right, then it's going to be less frustrating for you and less frustrating for them. And you got to give yourself some grace too, because you're not going to be perfect all the time. You're going to get frustrated. It's hard not to get frustrated when someone's repeating things or doesn't remember things. So you got to give yourself a break too. My father used to always tell me a lot of times, you got to give yourself a break. It's interesting how those words came back. So
mm,
I think it's very important that you accept them for where they're at. Um, the other thing is, people will say, "Oh, they were so much better. My mother, my father, my grandparent was better 6 months ago." Yeah, sure, they were 6 months ago because it's a steady decline, but you got to accept
mm,
them at all stages because if you don't, it's not going to be good for you. So I'll tell you a story that happened to us. My mother was visiting, went to a 90th birthday party of her aunt in Texas. And she said to me and my brother and sister, you got to watch and stay over with dad. So we did. The next time we got together, we said, "What did you do?" And I said, "Oh, I took him to a movie." My brother says, "Oh, we took him to a movie too." My sister said, "We took him to a movie too." And they said, "What movie did you take him to?" So I said, "I took him to Argo. That was the movie with Ben Affleck that won the Academy Award." And my brother goes, "Oh, we took him to Argo too." And my sister goes, "Yup, we took him to Argo too." And we had quite a laugh. It was very funny. And obviously my father didn't remember from day to day. But I have to tell you something, guys. That night when I went home, I cried because we really weren't accepting him for what, if we accepted him for who he was, despite the fact he wouldn't have remembered the movies, we would have taken him to three different movies. So I regretted that we different. I was in a support group once and someone put, and it sounds reasonable. Isn't it wonderful that a person with Alzheimer's or dementia is in their own world? And I said, yeah, that makes sense. But you know what? I don't want them to be in their own world. If you're in their own world, you're going to let them sit on the side, and you're not going to accept them for who they are. So, acceptance to me is very important. The other thing that was important to me and I learned, and the story that I'm going to tell about his awakening maybe makes this more true, is to include them. As long as your loved one is living, include them in life. So again, I try to take him to a movie and lunch as long as I could. And I knew he wouldn't remember 5 minutes after we left the movie, but sometimes, especially if it was a sad movie, you could see the tears in his eyes. He was really enjoying it for the moment. So it was very important to include him in life. And even when he got to the point where he couldn't leave the house, I would come over and we'd watch TV and we'd eat lunch together. So I could tell you a memory that we shared about inclusion. That's a really good story. And my father loved to take, when I was a kid, to the horse racing. That's something he liked to do. And not the thoroughbreds like the Kentucky Derby. There's another type where horses run and the guys sit in a cart. It's called the trotters.
Right.
So he took me as a kid, and I used to go with my uncle. And then when I had kids, we used to take my kids. So right before my son started first grade, my father said, let's go to the track. And we took my son. My daughter was too little at the time. We went. My father was a pretty good handicapper. It was one race whenever we went that he typically thought a horse was going to win. It was usually the best odds. But that day, he won some money. I don't know exactly. He would never tell us exactly how much he won. I always told my mother he broke even if he won. So he says to my son, you want to go to the toy store? I'll buy you a big toy. So we go to the toy store. My son buys $100 Lego. Very happy. He starts first grade the next day or 2 days later, and the teacher gives the students an exercise and says, what would you do if you had $100? And my son says, I'd go to Freehold Raceway.
I love that. I love,
So I told my father the story. He laughed. The next week he says, let's go back. I said, Dad, we don't go week to week. I'm on a win streak. We go back. He doesn't win a race. I said to him, oh, I'm sorry we lost. And he winks at me. And he says to my son, remember, he says, when you go to the track, expect to lose. 10 years later, it's his 75th birthday party, and my son is talking to grandpa and says, Grandpa, I know now you like occasionally go to the casino and to play poker. I want you to know one thing, expect to lose. So they gave it back to him.
I love,
Flash forward,
yeah.
it's maybe 10 months before he passed away. At this point, he was incontinent, needed help getting washed, really wasn't very verbal. And out of nowhere, he says, I want to go to the track. I knew 2 seconds later he would forget. I lived in New Jersey at the time. They were in New York. The raceway was near me. I'd have to drive back and forth because my mother wasn't driving. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take him because it's something he enjoys. The other thing, talking about care, I had another way of gauging my father's dementia. Over the years, I would see how he read the racing form. he would circle less and less things on the race form as he got more mentally declined, interestingly enough. And at this point, he couldn't even know the odds. So we went to the track. And the first race, he couldn't even read the form or the odds. We said, "What? Pick a number, Dad. What horse do you want?" He goes, "Number 7." So my mother typically wasn't interested in the track, but she popped her head up and says, "He doesn't know what he's talking about. That's the longest horse in the race. It's 45 to 1." And my son goes, "Grandma, when Grandpa says a horse is going to win, it usually does." And I said, "Mom, Dad's a good handicapper. So we're going to put a few more bucks on that race." Horses go off. Our horse is in dead last. Coming down the stretch, all of a sudden the horse comes out of nowhere, wins by a nose.
I love it.
No reaction though from my father. But my son says, "Grandpa, the horse you picked, the longest horse in the race, came from nowhere and won." And the biggest smile came to his face. And that moment made it all worthwhile to include him in that time. It's a memory that my son, he actually told his story as part of his eulogy when my father passed away. And it's a memory we always had. So my messages, and I know that was a little winded, is include them in life. And I tell those stories in my book too about acceptance and inclusion. And what I do in the book too is I give reflection pages for the reader. I try to bring them in the book. So whether you're dealing with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's or another mental disease or even a physical disability or illness, I said, what was the time you accepted your loved one from where they're at? Or when was the time you included them something? So I do that in all my various chapters. But that's really the things I've learned about being a caregiver that helped make the experience important to me. And towards the end, when I would go over there and he would just sit there and kiss my hand, that meant the world to me. I just knew the essence of who he was there. So that's the experience we had until he had his awakening, which was really remarkable.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you shared that. You know, when you were talking about trotters, there used to be a track down just down the street from me, and my husband and I basically broke people when we first got together, and we that was one of the places that we would go, and always enjoyed the ponies.
Yeah,
But but your stories are so uplifting and really prove to the point where they may not be with you all the time, but they are there enough to bring memories and joy, even when you least expect it.
that's exactly right. And we had this other experience that was amazing, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But you're right. You hear, he knew us even towards the end. He basically still knew who we were. There was times he didn't. I think that's particularly difficult for people when they don't remember you. But you hear about hints of recognition. But that's the truth. There are going to be the moments that you can cherish.
Yeah,
So
my sister-in-law had Alzheimer's, started out dementia, moved into Alzheimer's, but there were two people she always knew, my husband and our daughter. And those names she knew point blank everything. And she knew that she always called him Robert. Everybody else calls him Bob or Rob or something like that. But um, she, the minute he'd walk in the room, you could see her just light
right.
up. I mean, that was her favorite brother. I don't want to say that to everybody since he had two others, but he
Well, it's
was
not
the
like you're telling it to an audience here. Well, I'll keep it secret.
but he was, always a favorite. And I was sitting down in front of her, and I can remember her turning to him and going, Robert, where's your wife? And I'm going, right here, you know. But
Right,
that shows you that the recognition can be spotty,
right.
but there was still joy when she saw him, and that meant a lot to me
Yeah,
and the
I
family.
hear you. I
Yeah.
hear you. Yeah. So let me tell you about the experience we had. So In 2015, the summer of 2015, he had two bouts of pneumonia. The second bout, they loaded him up with steroids and antibiotics. And I went to visit him in the hospital. And I walk into the room and he says, "Hi, Danny." And I said, "Hi, Dad." And he goes, "You know, I love you very much." And I said, "I love you very much." And he says, "What happened to me?" And I said, "Well, you have pneumonia, you're being treated, and you're going to go home soon." But then all of a sudden it dawned on me that this wasn't the man that I saw a few days earlier. I was just interacting with him like I did always over the years. I didn't realize for a moment that this resembles my dad before the dementia. And my brother, whose office takes care of him, had admitting privileges to the hospital, was there a lot. And we had 2 days where he was literally awake. If I had to put it in percentages, I would say 90% himself. My brother said that the bar was so low that he came back so high answering every question that it was remarkable. So we had this 2 day experience, and I could share with you some of the things that happened on those 2 days, which was really remarkable. So,
Go
so
ahead.
We're all ear, we're all ears.
It's like, yeah,
that's what
and
I'm here
next.
for, right? So at one point he says to my brother, "I'm happy to have a son like you." And here's the interesting thing. I wrote another chapter in the book called Perspectives. So I used to say to myself, wow, there's nobody in the world that could have the relationship I have with my father. I mean, it's that close, that special, that amazing. And then at his 75th birthday party, when I heard both my brother, and he and I are very different, and my sister's his baby girl, talked to my father, I realized that they felt exactly the same way as me about him. He had this way of making everybody feel so special. And it was so interesting to me that, you look at your life through your own lens sometimes. If you can appreciate other people's perspectives, it'd be a lot more empathy in this world, and you could really appreciate other things. So my brother, after he heard this, he said it was one of the most seminal memories of his life that his father, who he loved and worshiped too, came back. My brother was a doctor, and after my father, he took like the mantle of being the problem solver, especially. But there was still a guy that when he needed was always my father. So when he came back, it was pretty amazing. We were sharing with him what the grandchildren were up to. This one is doing this, and this one is doing that. And all of a sudden, my father says, "Isn't one of the grandchildren in medical school? And isn't another one just started an Ivy League school?" And we said yes. And here's the amazing part. Those events happened while he was in the throes of dementia. And we said to ourselves, how did he know that? Because you never really know what someone dementia is thinking or knowing. He also knew what hospital he was at, without anybody telling him. And was saying, wow, maybe a person with Alzheimer's or dementia is more aware of what's going on than people let on. So, it's another reason to include them. But that was really pretty amazing. My mother, they were married 62 years at the time. She said he told her she was the love of his life, which meant much to her. My father had certain quirks growing up. He liked to nap, and he would take a long black or brown sock and put it over his eyes, right? And he hadn't done that since way before, 10 years earlier. He says to my mother, "Do you have my sock? I want to take a nap." Incredible. The other thing my father was, if you took care of him, especially in a service situation, he was a generous tipper. Didn't matter whether he was poor or middle income, whatever. If he appreciated you, he tipped. He was a tipper. So he says to my mother, "You got any cash? I want to tip the nurses and the aides because they're so nice to me."
Love it.
Really incredible. He would reminisce about he was a boxer in the army, 26-0, and he reminisced how he was underestimated and surprised his opponents. And then he talked about Muhammad Ali, who he loved. He talked about a football player on the New York Jets. His name was Wayne Corbett, who was very undersized and small and had a great career. And he goes, like Corbett, I surprised my opponents. And he goes, you remember that picture we took? He had bought in all the grandchildren Wayne Corbett's 80 jersey. I have the picture actually, with all of us in the picture and my father. So that was pretty remarkable.
That's,
Um, I don't know, did we lose call for a second there,
well, he just
Maggie?
put us on, he put us out. I don't know, he may have had a phone call or whatever, but you and
Oh,
I are
okay.
still here.
That's not what happened.
Oh,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I was listening.
I'm
he's still
sorry.
listening. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So my children, I wanted to bring them there so they could see their grandpa, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I couldn't get him there till the end of the second day, and he really had reverted back to his dementia. But we had videotaped a lot of him, and my daughter in particular was pretty emotional. And we showed him a tape where my brother asked him, what are you happy about? And he said, I'm happy just to be here and alive. And that really struck me because what I think he was telling his family is that I still appreciate life and I still have a desire to live. And even in the throes of dementia, I appreciate life and I want to live. And I thought that was so remarkable for us as a family. He's fighting to live. And I decided that, you know what, I want to share this story because I like to write anyway. So there's a site called medium.com where you could post certain articles. And I did this not too long after the incident. And I wrote about the story. And to this date, I got about 300,000 plus views. But was remarkable, a lot of people in similar circumstances said not only did they think it was a heartwarming story, but it gave them hope that their loved one also appreciated life and wanted to live. And that to me was probably the best thing that came out of this is that maybe his message was bigger than just to his family, but he was sharing with people that even in that condition, he wanted to live and he appreciated life, and maybe he knew more about what was going on than we thought. So it was a
And that
remarkable
message is
experience.
huge, is because for me, I always wondered, would my mother be happy where she was? I knew that she didn't like to be out of her home. So being in a home, like she always told me, don't put me in a home, but I can't, it got to a point where we didn't have a choice. And I
Right,
always was so, I felt so terrible about she wouldn't have wanted this. What she would have thought, what she would have, but of course, I don't know what she would have thought or would have, but that's really interesting for me to think that maybe while she was in there, that she was just enjoying her life and not, it was me. You know what I mean? Like as caregivers, we take everything
right.
on the way that we think we would be if it were us, but it's not us. So that's a very interesting perspective to think, what did they think? And, and because I couldn't ask her, you found out for me. You know what I mean? It was
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe, and that's what happened. So, we were trying to surmise why did this happen, right?
Hmm.
So my brother, the doctor, he wanted to come up with a medical explanation. So the first theory he had was, well, the steroids. He was hypertensive. They loaded him up with steroids, which they do to a person at the end of life. He says, well, maybe the steroids reduced the inflammation in his brain and he got a temporary awakening. And I said to myself, this is a progressive downward disease. How can anything reverse it? So I didn't necessarily buy it. 10 years later, and I started my podcast, Awakenings in Real Life, the first story I did was I had my brother as a guest. He did some more research, found that steroids can actually have a negative effect. His new theory is now because he got better from the pneumonia, it has something to do with dopamine levels and neurotransmitters. I don't know. I don't buy it. His neurologist said he never saw anything like it in 30 years. My brother spoke to his colleagues. Nobody had anything like it. Then I said to myself, well, maybe it's a miracle. And I'm not a very religious person, but to me, that was as good an explanation as anything else. The third thing I surmised in the book was, well, my father was a fighter. Literally, he was a street smart guy that made a successful business. And maybe, and there were times during his illness where he would be hospitalized for one reason or another. And my brother would say, well, his bodily functions are shutting down. I may not make it in the morning. And the next morning came and he miraculously, he had like literally 8 or 9 lives. So maybe he's sending us a message that he's fighting to live and and he still wants to be there. So I had a little book signing recently, and a friend of mine came and he gave me an explanation that I probably liked the best. And he says to me, your father probably went through what he went through so that you could write this story and share his message. And I like that. I like that
Mm.
message the best. And I think there is a bigger message to what happened with him, and that's why I want to share it. Like I want to share it with you guys and on your podcast because we all need hope, right? It's a tough thing to see someone going through it, but any glimpse of the hope is a good thing, I think.
Mm.
I have to say, my mom was in a coma the last
Mm.
almost month of her life, but I kept talking to her just like she was still there. Same way. It's like the doctors told me she was still listening. And so I was able to tell her, share music with her, share what I was doing. And whether you realize it or not, because he knew what his grandchildren were doing, it's because you had shared it with him.
That's
He was
right.
still listening. The brain shuts down when it's ready for the rest of the body to go. But you
Right.
never know. And that's what the doctors told me. So I just kept talking to her till I couldn't talk to her anymore. And there is a power higher than us that we may not
Right.
always be able to explain, but is there. And that was there to reinforce you and also to awaken you to the fact that you weren't the only special one in your family.
That's right.
The brother and
Exactly.
sister was too.
Oh, I still like to think I was his favorite,
Oh,
but don't
yeah,
tell my
I
brother and
agree.
sister that.
But he loved
But
you all very much.
he did. He had that thing. So I was an entrepreneur, and when my last consulting gig ended, I said, you know what? I'd like to take this story and maybe make a book.
Yeah.
But I said, you know what? I don't think that story enough is to write a book. But I got some great family stories, and mostly with my father, but with my uncle, my mother, and boy, I'd like to share these stories. But then I said, why would another family be interested in my family stories? So I have to find a small publishing house in California that liked what they heard, and I shared some of the stories. And then talking to the editor, it made me realize that in reflecting back on my family life and my father's life and reflecting on what happened to him, I realized that these various stories were what I call almost mini awakenings or lessons learned that I could share. So again, I included my things about inclusion and acceptance through the dementia, but I shared other stories of my father, like he was a great problem solver and he knew when we should fight and not fight. I shared a story about acts of kindness. My uncle, who was my father's beloved bachelor uncle, he would pick us up 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon. I don't even think he knew the flight information. He just showed up. The importance of showing up. And so I share these stories and the lessons I learned. And then I have these reflection pages. So I give people the opportunity, like I think I mentioned it early, to reflect on their own life and take what I learned and see how they can apply it to their life, no matter what they're going through. And it doesn't, again, have to be dementia, but we're all going through something. So that's
Something.
how I
Mm.
came to writing these other stories of the book. And the first part is the dementia journey. The second part is these family stories, and the third part is certain reflections. So you talk about you were talking to your mother during the coma. The other thing that I like to share with people, and I have a chapter called "A Living Eulogy to My Father." You know, we've all been to funerals, right? I lost both my
Mm,
parents. I lost a close friend. I've been to friends' parents' funerals, and sometimes I know the deceased, and sometimes I didn't. But when I would hear the eulogies, whether I knew the person or not, I was typically moved to tears. And one day I said to myself, wow, the person who really should be hearing this is the person that passed away,
mhm,
right? And isn't it a shame that we tell our loved ones, I love you, or you're good to me, but we never really make that kind of speech or express all the things we can to someone. I made, at the 75th birthday party, we all got to express that to my father. And when I turned 40, I actually wrote both my parents a letter about that, and they said it was the greatest gifts that they received. But, I urge people that, and it doesn't have to be an elderly person, it could be a younger person. Share how you feel about someone while they're here and appreciate it because don't do it when they're passed away and you're sharing it with another. Tell them now. And if you're too embarrassed to talk to someone, send an email, do a video, write a handwritten letter, all time thing. I think that's a good message to people. And I'm so glad we had the opportunity because 5 months after his party, he had the stroke. And
mm.
so we did get the opportunity to share those things with him. So that's
That's
something I share in
fantastic.
the book as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Where, speaking of the book and podcast, tell us where we can get everything.
Oh, okay. So the book is available on Amazon.com, Awakenings in Real Life, a memoir by Dan Cohen. It's also on BarnesandNoble.com and select bookstores. You can go to my website, awakeningsinreallife.com, and that'll give you a link to the Amazon, and it gives you an excerpt from the book and certain reviews. So far, the reviews have been pretty good. I'm very pleased that one of the leading voices in dementia wrote something very nice about it that made me feel good. I'll just tell you quickly how I started my podcast because I wasn't planning to be a podcaster. Um, I saw this story on TV. Well, you can see I like to talk, so maybe.
Really, I noticed that. Uh,
I saw a story about a guy who had a spinal injury. I think he was in Chicago, and he says, "You know what? I'm going to change things up. I'm going to learn how to sail. I'm going to give up my corporate life and sail across the Pacific Ocean." And he did. And he posted, he became a viral sensation. And I said to myself, wow, this guy had his own awakening in real life, you know? And I said, boy, there must be some tremendous stories out there of people who had, you think of awakening as something religious or spiritual, or maybe like a getting up like my father, but awakening really means a realization, recognition, or awareness of something. And I bet you I can tell these kind of stories. So I educated myself on how to do a podcast. And I call it telling inspirational stories of transformation, meaning, and hope. And I have people that overcome trauma, illness, a near-death experience, loss. I got a guy who was bullied his whole life. At 43 years old, he had an awakening that he wanted to become a humanitarian clown, and he goes over the world bringing joy. So a guy, when he was bullied, tried to be invisible as he can. Later in life, went into something where he had to be as visible as he can. So I put out 18 episodes to date. You can find the podcast is also Awakenings on Real Life. It's on YouTube and Apple and Spotify and wherever you find your podcast. There's also a link to it on my website. If you want to share some of get my book and share your reflections, you can email me at info@awakeningsinreallife.com. I welcome hearing from readers or listeners of the podcast. And, I'm happy I've gotten like a new career or calling that I never expected.
Mm.
You know, I would joke around when I was younger. I was the guy who always videotaped the family parties. So now I'm sometimes in front of the camera too.
That's wonderful. My dad, I always said he was the Cecil B. DeMille of my town and our family because he always had a camera with him. And I've still got some of the old film around and I've got to get it transferred over so we can see it in real life. But
We
there's a way for people to not be afraid to learn. And people, so many kids think that their phone are their best friend. It's like, let's continue talking, learning from each other, sending out peace, sending out love, sending out kindness. Because it starts sometimes with the family, but sometimes it's not the family that it starts with.
right.
It's not every family is a happy family, you know?
Your one can be a mentor. It can be a
Exactly.
close friend. It doesn't have to be a
Exactly.
family member.
Exactly.
But
And
yeah,
you telling your stories and saying, come on, folks, let's share really helps open the door. Yeah.
And I
thank
really
you.
hear what you're saying about having a new career because I've been in fitness for the last 45 years of my life. And I always thought exercise is what I would do forever. But since my mother's dementia experience, I decided to become a caregiver for caregivers because I realized caregivers need so much love and attention that they just don't get otherwise. And so I said, let
Right.
me bring attention to that. So this is my new career at 66 because I'm the same age as you. All of a sudden, here I am with this
And you
new
look
career,
much
this whole new
younger
way
than
of
me.
looking at life. Yeah.
You look much younger than me, Carl.
No, I
So,
don't. It's just I'm
Oh,
bald. That's
oh,
all.
you guys both look real good as far as I'm concerned, both of you. And that hair, oh my goodness. Oh, Carl, that's
Beautiful,
right. You
right?
don't have
I'm getting off the phone and I'm calling my fiance because she's not going to want to hear that because I
hair.
talk about my hair sometimes. But yes, I admire what you're doing, sharing these stories and bringing these stories out. And listen, before I don't think I ever listened to a podcast prior to deciding to do a podcast. I had never known, podcast how widespread they are and how much of an audience you can eventually reach and how the average person, you don't have to be discovered somewhere to get on TV, can share something that hopefully can have meaning to people. So I think it's a
Very true.
wonderful thing you got, and you guys make a very good team. So
Oh, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, I come from a broadcasting background, so I been in broadcasting for over 50 years. And Carl used to be on my show, and I used to do a radio show on Sirius XM, as well as
ah,
just a number of other places. And
good for
the
you.
the thing is, I was always a person who believed that there is more positive than there is negative in this world, and that's what I wanted to do. And that's what you're doing. You're sharing. Carl is sharing. We all are. And it's like lifting folks up instead of putting them down. I don't listen to podcasts where there's a lot of cursing and making fun of people and stuff like that. It's like, no, I don't
Yeah.
need that in my life. Let's lift each other up.
I'm with you on that one. I really am, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm enjoying on being on other people's podcasts, and I'm enjoying learning about other people's story. And the interesting thing is, a lot of the people when they came back, they, as much as it's a story about his awakening from dementia, people like that it's a story of a father and a son, and maybe this is really my love letter to my father and my legacy to him that hopefully will live on way past my life too, and maybe have
Well,
a
let's hope you
positive.
got a lot more time to go,
Hi.
Dougie.
With
Yeah.
this
Okay.
head of hair, I'm gonna live for a long time
You're gonna
now.
look good. It's kind of like Robert Redford when he passed away, everybody said, but that hair, that's what you got going for you, if nothing else, for sure. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered it. I appreciate the opportunity so much, and I hope if you're out there, you pick up the book because I think whether you're going through something with someone dementia, Alzheimer's or not, I think it's a story people will enjoy and find interesting, and there's some funny parts, and hopefully you can learn some things. And if you want to learn about people's awakenings, I tell some very, very interesting stories as well.
Yeah. Well, you've got a good podcast going now too. So
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I thank you very much and send you
Thank you. Thank you.
blessings.
Yeah.
I
Blessings.
I thank you both so much. I really do. Thanks so much.
Okay,
Sure.
aloha.
Aloha. Have a
All
great
right.
day.
Yeah, you
All
do
right.
the
Thank
same.
you.
Thank you,
All right.
Dan. Dan Cohen's life was shaped by one person more than anyone else, his father. He grew up in Brooklyn, built a career first as an attorney and then as an entrepreneur, but his most important role came later as a caregiver for his dad. That journey and the incredible connection they shared led to a moment that changed everything. It inspired him to start the Awakenings in Real Life book and podcast to explore those powerful, life altering experiences. You can listen to his story on the Awakenings in Real Life podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Find out more about Dan at awakeningsinreallife.com.